skin, eh? And just to give you a heads up, your comments are echoed throughout the nation. And secondly, I want to thank you, Gordon and Jean, for coming today. And I believe that we'll give you the first crack at the discussion. Yeah, I believe you made contact with myself at one point, and then we're finally getting together. So you have the floor.
Thank you for seeing us, gentlemen. I contacted Brian when
Gordon, maybe I should do a round of introductions.
Yeah.
I apologize. My name is Brian Williams. I'm chairing the meeting today. My Smogich name is Squeer from Kispiox and Fireweed.
Norman Moore, get the maps.
Robin Alexander, Muskin.
My name is Chaz Ware, Wolf Clan. I'm the technical advisor to the Gitxsan government. I work for Gitxsan Environmental Services.
Gordon Sebastian, Gitxsan, Executive Director.
There's Robert Campbell, Samogan and Sniskaminu, crisis management team.
Gene Allen, Dispatch Valley.
Gord Wadley, I'm from Smithers.
Smithers. Vernon Smith, EU Plan, traditional name Sachamirok, Gilunga West.
Elaine Sampson.
Recording. Elaine Sampson. Okay.
So we get Mark. Last part fails me.
Good, but Willis, good.
Yes. Thank you for honoring us with the opportunity to speak with you. I was recently hired by a Upper Skeena Angling Guide Association, and the question's been asked what the salmon crisis team is working on, and how we may be able to work with each other or see how we can help. And I think we all recognize the salmon runs are in jeopardy. We are an association of, I think it's 11 or 12 members that operate within, it's called the Upper Skeena, so it goes from Hazleton through to the Morries, to the Babine, and to the Upper Skeena itself. Of, I think, the 12 members, I think about, let's see, 8 of them do operate in Gitxsan territory. Now, in various areas. So that would be one of the guides on the Babine. It would be a guide on the Bear, a guide on the Sustut Upper Skeena, and one guide was a hunting territory up in Cluetantan. Then there's a number of guides here, 2 guides in the Hazelton area, both from Kispiox. So they do operate almost totally in Gitxsan territory. And there's a number of guides that operate down into the lower Buckley. So also coming into Gitxsan territory, but not very often. And another one that has rod days as well on the Skeena. I guess what I'd like to do first is sort of explain a little bit about how the association and the guide aspect works. We've been trying to operate in your territories. One of the first things I asked the association was to try and ensure they've spoken with the chiefs of the areas in which they operate. I'm not sure how many have done that at this point, but we felt if we could come and speak with you, that maybe we could find out how we can work these things out. We operate under a license with the Ministry of Environment. These licenses were determined in, I think, 1990. There was a lot of guiding going on since the 70s, basically, but they decided at a certain point they wanted to control some of the growth of angling and guiding in the Skeena area. So, on the basis of the best of 3 years of 87, 88, and 89, they allocated guide licenses. And with that, they allocated rod days. So what that means is we have X number of rod days, that's 1 client per day type of thing that we can operate on in the classified period, so say September to October. Now, all of these guides are primarily steelhead fishing guides. There is not an awful lot of salmon fishing involved. So it is a catch and release fishery. We like to think we're conservation oriented. So we're one of the only sectors of the sport fishery that is regulated. And when we sat with the government and agreed to being regulated, the promises from the government were to the public and to the sport fishermen and the guides were that they would have control over how many anglers would go to every area. So every river was going to have an angling management plan. Needless to say, the government did not do that. And I think we've all seen what's happened up and down the Skeena with ever-increasing growth in some of the aspects of the fisheries, sport fisheries. And it starts right out in the ocean, where there is no control of numbers, no control over how many charter boats can operate. And the lower Skeena, as many of us know from driving back and forth to Rupert, is a bit of a zoo. It's overcrowded. And it's much the same in the Smithers area and on some areas of the Kispiox. It's becoming a little bit too much. So this has impacted guides on the basis of being the one controlled part of the fishery and not having any say on what's going on the whole. So I think the last thing any of us want to see is Gitxsan territory become like Terrace, out of Prince Rupert, or even areas around Smithers, where there's boats all over and anglers from bank to bank. And so with that in mind, I think we'd like to find out where the crisis management team, how you're looking at getting government to the table to try and deal with some of these issues. Yeah, I know there's been some efforts made in GAC and Spayux. And we've tried to work with people in Spayux on some of these issues. And right now, I'd have to say the only managed water in the Skeena is probably in the Kispioch area. And I think in Gitxsan you now have some control over how many people can put their boats into the water there. But once they're on the water, you see what goes on. So I guess what I'd like to say at this point is I can't speak totally for the association. I've only been with them a month or two, and I really have to take back any information I can get back to the association. So what I'd like to do is ask if you have any questions about the guide operations first, so that you will at least understand where we're coming from.
Has there been people guiding this year for Sealet in Gitxsan territory already?
Yes, there has.
And where?
I think on the Skeena and on the Kispioch, and I would imagine in the lower Babine. I would imagine on the Sustup and Skeena in that area.
And that's just for Sealand?
That's just for Skeena.
And lower Buckley.
Pardon?
And the lower Buckley.
And the lower Buckley, that's correct,
Any comments you want to add to what Gordon has said, Gene?
I just to kind of put it in a little bit of a perspective, I guess. Like, I wrote a letter when this first started to Gordon, and I stated at that time, kind of the same thing Gordon said, that I am so pissed at government, both federal and provincial, for doing absolutely nothing about the salmon. They think if they stay status quo, nobody has to work within the bureaucracy. And I guess that's what they do. But it has to start right in salt water. It has to, like Gordon says, the charter boat fishery is larger than the commercial fishery now. I know one guide, a friend of mine that guided on a lodge last year, they knowingly killed 6,000 Chinook salmon. So it needs to start there, but I understand also that they do lay eggs in fresh water. We as guys, my son and I, have not guided for salmon for 10 years because we refuse to go. I don't even fish for them anymore here because I know how much trouble they're in. Not that we're going to make a difference, but it's just the principle of it. They're getting beat up, and they're getting beat up by people. And to me, for them to, you hear people talking about, oh, First Nations are netting and they're catching fish. Well, do you think that it's right to shut down a First Nations fishery when all these charter boat fisheries, people from other countries are coming in and filling coolers with thousands of pounds of fish and flying them home? You think that's right and the First Nations shouldn't fish? And that's my bench, is that we need to start taking care of where the problems are. Last year was a prime example of what happened in the commercial and charter boat fishery. Southeast Alaska closed it down. All of a sudden, we ended up with a lot more salmon than we were supposed to end up with. This year, they hammered them. This year, we have the lowest run of steelhead in 50 years. So it's a trickle-down effect, and it doesn't just start with the salmon. It starts with putting out 200,000 cubic meters of timber in the upper Kispioch, or in the Kispioch TSA, targeting red cedar. The biggest cooling effect on watersheds and groundwater is red cedar. In the early days, his dad worked with my dad, and they winter peeled cedar poles. They selected a log. 1968, they went back and they put a whole power line in up the Kispioch with poles from that selected log block. 5 years after that, they come into the logging company, flatten the whole thing. There's no more poles. My son has a woodlot. I loaded a load of cedar poles on a truck this year to Billy David that he said, I loaded them off that woodlot 35 years ago when Don Messer had. There's sustainability with a load of cedar poles. Now 20, 35 years later, there's some cedar poles ready to go. Selective logging. And I'm off on, this is part of the Samus crisis. I know I'm getting off on a tangent, but it all runs downhill. So, right now, all these blocks that are targeting red cedar, if they are going to do that, then they should be selective logged with smaller equipment, hiring local people, and you would log a lot less timber and you employ a lot more people. Right now, there's a logging contractor that has more money than he owns half a terrace, went up the Kiskioks and logged a block as big as my son's woodlot in 3 weeks. Finished, done. Flattened everything, cedar down to there. Now they're going to the bottom end of Tennis Mountain. It runs to Skeena. There's all them freshets now that don't have anything to cool them down anymore. The red cedar's gone. So government is doing zero. And you know, yeah, the guides have an effect on stuff, but I'll give you an example. There's 384 guided rod days on the Kispiock, so that means the guides will put, in 38 days, will put 10 clients a day on the river. So before, when there were 3 guide outfitters, that's 3 1/3 fishermen. But if you go the full 61 classified days, we put 5 fishermen a day on the river. And that's on creel surveys that have been done. It's always been 12 to 15% guided effort on the Kispioks, 85% non-resident, non-guided effort on the Kispioks, and a lot of illegal guides. There's more illegal guides in the Skeena system than there are legal guides right now, and that's maybe where we get the black mark, I don't know, but it seems like if you come from another country and come here, which I guess we did before we got here, but I mean, there's 5 generations of my family here, so I really actually care about where I live and taking care of the environment and the fish and the timber. And I've done it all. I've logged for a living and I've done that kind of thing. But we need to start taking care, if we take care of the fish, but we need to do that first. And if it means, I'm in full favor of shutting down all these rivers for a full cycle of king salmon or spring salmon or Chinook, whatever you want to call them, for 7 years. And that allows cycles of all other salmon, maybe 2 to 3 cycles of sockeye and pinks. Close it completely. And that's the only way they're going to sustain and bounce back.
Just so you know, I wouldn't say that that was a personal opinion. I don't think we can say that that's from the association,
No, it's
which
not.
is part of the situation I find myself in as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I have fairly strong opinions about some things as well, and much like he, I think we deal with, ever declining flows in our rivers, and an easy catch-all is climate change, but I think we've all seen the water's edge logged to up to 60%, and flow regimes changing, and so we're getting lower waters. And yes, climate change is a bit of a play, but we affected it as well, And we continue to do that, we may not end up with water in our fish streams. So there is an awful lot that comes into play. If we can support the salmon crisis team or the chiefs in any way to get somewhere with the government on dealing with these issues, we would be more than willing to entertain any ideas you have.
Even though Gene, that's his own personal opinion, he's coming from a guy's point of view as well.
Yeah.
And he knows that if this fish is gone,
There's
nothing, especially for us.
Yeah.
And it's probably,
Yeah. No, I have to agree totally.
Mhm.
It's fish first. Otherwise, there is nothing.
So we have a bit of an agenda we want to work with you, Gordon and Jean on. We'll start off with East Kimanu, then we have Norman and then,
No, him and then me.
okay.
Semgeet, Simana, Woord, Forget, Gordon and Jean. I thank the people for coming here. Because we are trying to involve people that the salmon affects. Not just in the Skeena, but the whole. That's why we started the crisis management team. And we welcome anybody who's willing to work with us as First Nations, because we're in dire straits right now. And what Gene said about logging is right. But it's more than that. Logging, I'm a hunter, and I see where they log, and sometimes there's not enough buffer zone. So all the silt is going down to the river, and there's nothing to keep the water after the snow. It just runs down. Like a friend of mine were across the river one time, that creek. I don't know what that creek was, but red to eggs. We went back there maybe about 3 weeks later, there's a mini flood. They're not coming back. And that's what logging is. There's other things, Norman will explain that, it's like the railway, they use herbicides, maybe even reforestation. I don't know if they still spray their trees. And that affects.
Not in this area.
He stopped that.
Oh, that's good then. Congratulations. Because that seeps under our water and underground water and comes up. And what Gene said about the warming up because of the trees are gone, I heard lots about that at the Heidi Line. Because when the water's too warm, fish have trouble surviving. And what we're basically doing is trying to stop recreational fishing. Because we don't know, catch and release. How many times do you catch a fish and eventually it dies? Because it's going to damage the fish. See, we don't have data for that. And I asked for that and nobody knows. And who monitors them? For all we know, maybe they're keeping more than what they're supposed to keep. So that's some of the problems that we're going through. And like I said, we welcome anybody who's willing to work with us, because it's not just the Gitxsan. It's the whole, because fish is our staple. We've been trying to get the general public to know what we're doing, because there's always the naysayers. And the government and the almighty dollar. Like Gene said, that's the whole problem there. It's just a few years ago, they used to take our nets away, our boats. So we should jail and charge us. It's always the Indians. We only take what we need. Yeah, there's a few bad guys, but not that much. And it's not just the natives, we see it all over. And there's my introduction to the crisis management. And again, I thank you people for coming to association.
Honored guests, thank you for coming this afternoon. And I was listening to Gene there, and to me, it's all about mismanagement, fish. It started, I'm a commercial fisherman it started when I was 16 out of Portrait Island. And when I was a small boy, you go up the river, get me out. You could almost walk across the river, how much fish going up to spawn. You're lucky to see one going by today on the same river. When I was commercial fishing, it's 4 days. One time we were going 10 days non-stop. It's all mismanaged by the federal and the provincial government. And there was some control, but as the fish declines, there's less control. There's no monitoring as we go along. There's no we hear the test fishing, and then there's fish fences. They counting fish. And they say they're doing their job to get more fish, build more stock, test fishery. They're the ones that determine when to fish, when not to fish. So, but at the same time, what good do those, like the Bad Bean fish fence, Gitxsan fish fence, what's the purpose is, they said they're building stocks and they're going by the signs and stuff like that. If they've been doing it for X number of years, and the fish is still declining, and yet their main purpose is to rebuild the stocks. And now we get into a fish crisis. It's all about mismanagement. Mismanagement started at the coast. You guys mentioned the coast, and seine boats got right up to the mouth of the Skeena after a while. They used to be at Area 5, and Skeena is Area 4. They come right up to the mouth. The commercial fishermen was against that. You don't see those little minnows anymore. They scrape the bottom. So there needs to be, I hear a little bit about logging. I was a logger too. Whenever there's no commercial fishing, I go in a bush and log. And clear-cut logging started in the 80s, I think, early 80s or something like that. And our chiefs, there's danger here. They're talking about their livelihood. Fishes are main course. And chiefs back then brought the ministry in forestry. The minister of the day said, don't be alarmed. 50 years from now, those trees are going to be ready to cut down again, harvested again. 60 years ago, the mountains are still bald. They replanted it, but when you start a garden, you got to look after the garden in order for potatoes and the vegetables to grow. You got to monitor that. They don't do that. The undergrowth pushed out the trees that are planted. They don't brush and weed. That's not a factor, and I hear when the first logging was first started, there's no buffer zone, so the fish got nowhere to hide from the sun when it's too hot because of no buffer zone. Even the cat goes through the spawning area. There's no regulation to stop that. So there's a lot of factors that we need to address, pull the government in with you guys' help. It'll make us stronger to open the government's eyes. I know the government is like sport fishing, they're pulling billions of dollars. Government is pulling, just like gas and they're pushing for it. The environmentalist is against it, but there's big money in that gas line. The same thing with where we are. And another one that's troubling information is that the fish will be extinct in 2055. There'll be no more fish. So I'm happy to hear that you guys want to jump on board and support our organization. The news this morning, I'm worried about it, is that the Japan, their nuclear waste, they got nowhere to put it anymore. So the first option for them is to take those nuclear waste and dump it in the Pacific Ocean. To me, we'll have no more fish probably in 10 years if that happens. So we need to get together, never mind the almighty dollar. As if we do rebuild, then we could monitor what's going on, and together we could regulate what's happening on our river and control. Because we were taught as First Nations to respect fish and wildlife. To us, there's no waste. Whatever we don't use, we give it back to the Creator. We burn it, either we burn it or bury it, and thank the Creator for what we have. In our cultural beliefs, if we burn it or bury it, it'll come back abundantly. So that's how we're brought up. It's not to abuse our land. If we go hunting and make a fire, put out the fire, make it look natural after, before you leave it. That's the respect we have with the land. So it's all about mismanagement by the province and the federal. And we need to work together and open the government's eyes. We may not have any impact with what Japanese is doing unless the federal fisheries step in and come up with a better solution than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. Welcome.
Excuse me for not standing up. My little toe is aching. Anyways, yeah, it is nice, very nice, to hear what you guys put forward today. It's something to work with, especially you, with your, you know what you're looking for. You know what you need. I'm not saying that your presentation was, it's what we're doing. That's exactly what Jane addressed. Okay, ever since the white man came here, and I say white man, you know what I mean. I'm an Indian, you guys are white, okay? Let's get that over with. Anyways, ever since the white man came here, we had jurisdiction. We were organized in an organized society. So they came along and they said, no, you guys are savages, No, you guys are savages, you have no religion. So, they eventually just started putting us on reserves, whereas our natural environment was on our land. It was on our land, that's where we were. Now on reserves, we are all just like caged animals, and when caged animals are together, like if you put a whole bunch of wolves together, they're going to start biting at each other. So that's the way it is now. Without a dysfunction, residential school is part of that. But what this effectively did was it took away from it took away our jurisdiction over the land. And it's the jurisdiction, that is what we're here for. We're here to enforce it, because as you heard from the previous speakers, the way the white man has been doing it is not right. It's not working. They just completely, money speaks for them. Money is what speaks. For us, it's the hereditary system that goes on and on and on. That means welgeënst. Gene, you've been around here, forever. So you know what I'm talking about. Welgeënst means that our traditions go on and on and on. And that means our jurisdiction too. Our jurisdiction. So you have us sitting here at the table trying to address this. How do we do this? And who is going to recognize our jurisdiction? First of all, we recognize our jurisdiction, and we're looking for other people that's going to recognize it. In other words, we're looking for people to work with us. And if somebody's willing to work with us, like Sachem Hero said, we will do that. The more who jumps on, the bandwagon, the better for us. That's not to say that that it's going to be a free for all. Of course, we're going to regulate it too. What we want is our fish back. And as you heard Sachem Hero say, mismanagement by a government has gone on too long, especially fisheries. And I've told them this, right to their faces, I've told them. I've also told Amy, and she's the fisheries now, Amy Wakefield. But each time I run into a fisheries officer, I tell them, you know what, you're closing down our fisheries, food fisheries, and you don't even know what you're talking about, I told them. What is going to happen this year is the fish are going to come late because of what you said. The waters are getting warm. Climate is changing. So I said to him, well, you know what, our fish are going to come late, and you're closing it down for the people who really need it now. The only time our people are happy is when the fish come, because they get a lot to eat. You know, it's either feast or famine for our people, and this is a time of feast. So we can't. The government is continuing with its oppressive measures against our people by issuing licenses, whether it's guide or sports fishing. Now, what this does to us, it undermines our jurisdiction. Our jurisdiction, of which, irregardless of what anybody says, this land is ours. And from that, we get our laws. Everything comes from the land. Everything that we are comes from the land. And when we talk about the land, we're talking about the water too. That's ours. Everything, all the little creeks that go up on our territories, it's ours. And then they spawn up there, those little fish, the fry, that's ours. They go down to the ocean and they mature. Then they come back. Guess whose own it is? Ours. Anyways, you get my point. So at this point in our lives, where there's a scarcity of the fish, and that is from what both these two former speakers talked about, and you. Everything just came together, and it everything that the white man did, the overfishing, commercializing of our fish, overforesting, or what do you call it? Well, anyways, you know what I mean, logging. What my dad and your dad did.
Yeah, but
Anyway.
you did it selectively.
Yeah. Anyways, all of this is contributing to our rivers, our creeks, starting to dry up, and hence the spawning areas, you know. No, they're all gone. You know, a lot of them are gone. A lot of our creeks are drying up. And the fish that used to go up on these some of these creeks, no more, you know, and that's really sad. So if we could work together with you people, you have to understand where we're coming from, and that is jurisdiction. And you know, anybody who's willing to work with us, we will do it, you know, and it sounds like you guys do, so. Thank you very much.
Robert?
Yeah, I just wanted to add what Norman said about issuing license and permits. You talked about our jurisdiction. Government issuing license or permits does not amount to they can trespass on our territory or not. So whenever somebody comes on our territory, they're trespassing without permission. That is our yoke. I cannot go on this fishing hole without permission, or any one of these guys. Same with lahip, the land, or hunting. And it's been like that for thousands and thousands of years, like well, yes. There's consequences to pay when you do that. And the government issuing license permit does not permit trespassing on our jurisdiction as Gitxsan people. That's what I wanted to emphasize. So again, now, I'll give the table back to the chair. Thank you.
Do you want to add anything, Robin?
Yeah, a little bit, okay. Like you've heard everybody say, but a little bit of history of our way of life. We're all human beings. We all respect a lot of stuff, but fishing, like everybody else said here, it's an exciting time of year. I've went without fish for 3 years. I was telling these guys earlier today, and it's a very important part of our diet, our way of life. It provides for our house, our families. It teaches our ways of how to speak to the stories that go on and on and on from history way back. It teaches our grandchildren. They watch us hang the fish the proper way, so they'll come back too. There's another way of, instead of dirty. There's a lot of teachings on there, and fish sites. A lot of teachings. A lot of respect. That's the main thing, is really a lot of respect among us First Nations. We can't even go on anybody else's fishing boats without permission. There was something else I was going to say here, but it's not. Irreplaceable knowledge, the rest of our health, right? It's been going on for thousands of years. Irreplaceable knowledge means we were past the technology that has gone on today. We managed the way the fish have gone through. We only take what we need, And if we do have a little bit more, we share amongst each other. It always goes up. We are the people that have a giving heart and share amongst each other. And these practices and methods have been used for thousands of years. Our language and everything is taught, like I said, stories. And I know there's something I'm missing here, but that's all I have to say.
Any
Oh, yeah.
questions? Go
Sorry.
ahead. Go ahead.
In our laws too, is the first thing, I see my granny, as we were down at the fishing site, we are not allowed to play with our fish. And then, we'll get scolded, and then story time comes. The reason why we're not allowed to play with our fish. And catch and release is one of them. Sport fishing, that's playing with our fish. And that is in our laws. So, we have it all documented down. I'm sure every one of us has spit in their ears and, head knowledge that gets passed on and on and on. And it boils down to respect again. Done.
Gordon, you had
Yeah,
questions?
I just wanted to clarify one or two things. When I suggested that we have personal opinions. I was trying to just represent what I set the meeting up for, which was with this Anglican Guide Association. As I said, I can't really speak for them, but I can offer my opinion. I've lived here most of my life. I'm fifth generation as well. My grandfather ran the Bell Pole Yard in New Haven. My life has been spent here at the graces of the First Nations, and my family would not have done well without people dropping us off fish and things like that. We weren't that well off. My mother and 4 children. Anyway, I spent a lot of my life working in fisheries and environment, and I've worked with Mr. Williams, and worked in most of the communities in the area. So yes, I've seen, much like this gentleman said, I've seen it go from where you could virtually walk on the Pinks in the Kishpiak River, and when Chinook and the Chums went up the creeks, and now they can't, and they're not there anymore. So I've seen what we've done, and I totally have recognized that the white man never did listen or learn from the First Nations, who had thousands of years of experience. And that is a sad, sad story. And there is no excuse for what we've done. And to watch what they've done in the watersheds, I've spent time working with agencies on looking at what the impacts have been on the way we logged. And as Gene pointed out, the selective logging of the cedar and stuff, you can walk into many of those areas now and you can't tell that it was gone. There's full cedar trees again, but when we go into some of these areas now, those trees that were there will never grow again. Forestry, they are not as good as they say they are with forestry. There is little forest science. It is all about money. And the impacts are cumulative. In other words, they're building up and they're ongoing. They're not going to go away. Our creeks go wider, flatter, shallower, so there's no place for fish. And this is what I've seen, and this is why I am concerned. I don't know even if we had all the fish back, whether we could ever sustain it, because they put culverts in all the creeks that the fish used to go into, and the culverts eat the base out at the bottom and downstream, and the fish can't get in. And these are creeks on the highway and the railroad, not counting all of the forestry related creeks. So yeah, I do know what we've done, and it's not as easy as saying it's the commercial guys or the commercial sport or any of that. We have done damage to the land, serious damage to the land. But the only way to find out if we can ever get them back is to get the fish back. And I've heard many times over my years about the mismanagement of fish. And yes, it used to be better with fisheries. They did pay more attention and put more effort into management. But now they just play between the user groups, right? And over the years, for years, they didn't pay any attention to First Nations. But now you have their ear in fisheries. And I would go as far as you can with that. The Ministry of Environment, they say they're managing stocks, but they're managing or trying to manage people only for money. When I spoke of the agreements that led to the licenses for guides, there was 5 different community processes where everybody from the community could go, whether they had a motel or a sporting goods store, or they were guides, or they had a cabin on a river. Everybody took part in these processes, and they assured us, yes, they were looking after the consultation with the First Nations. So in these 5 processes, the residents, the people that live in this area, that were involved, they all wanted
the government to control the total numbers, and that never happened. So you're not alone. And as you say, it's difficult to get public to jump onto things, not understanding what it is people are looking for. So perhaps that's where we can try and help. Resident anglers are not happy with how the management has gone. And many of them have quit fishing, and now they go to Rupert to go out in the ocean and catch what they can because it's open season. You have to understand there is no end in sight for the numbers that can come. On the ocean or on the rivers, the government has no, it's like you all come. There is no end number for them. We all know tourism is a pretty big industry in this area now. Can be and could grow. But if it continues to grow in that direction, there won't be anything. They have a very difficult time managing between the user groups. For example, many anglers up in this area that do fish steelhead, in this area we're closed for 6 months of the year to fish streams. And as soon as you're past Cedar Vale, you can fish year-round for anything you want. So there's a division between the anglers in this area and, say, the anglers in the terrace area. We don't all agree on how this is all done. And they've managed to divide the user groups up so that it's difficult for everyone to get together. Now, in the 90s, there was a Skeena Watershed Committee that represented First Nations, commercial fishermen, and sport fishermen. And our meetings were held with Ministry of Environment and with Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And during that process, the user groups, the First Nations, commercial and the sport, came to realize that we could do better than what they were doing. But it made it very difficult for the government managers to accept that there was that much agreement with ensuring that fish were coming back. It may be that's where things have to go again. And maybe it does have to start in an area where people are together. I don't think it's an easy thing to do to get public across the Skeena to jump on. It's multifaceted, there's so many different parts, and some people are just after catch or Chinook, and some people are after coho, and so it will be difficult, but we have to start somewhere. And Gene's plea on the logging aspects is very real. We've been part of a group working here in Hazelton to try and control or look at what the government's trying to do with increasing cuts again. The Kispiox for years would never, if it even thought of raining, the Kispiox would go to mud after all of the logging in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It finally healed, and now they want to go in and do it again. I don't think our watersheds can take this anymore. I honestly don't. And as they climb the hills, we all know they left no protection, as you said, along the creeks and the river valleys. They took all the best timber first, and now they're climbing steeper and steeper, and there's less and less protection to the waterways, which is going to bring more sediments down, as you said too. So that contributes to the wider, flatter, shallower. And people are blind. And as was pointed out, it's all about money. And people are blind. Now they can say, oh, it's climate change. But it's not only climate change. We have to make some of those changes ourselves. I look forward to going back to the association and sharing with them some of the things that have been said here. And if you have any further questions about how we operate or what we represent, I'd certainly trying to answer any that I can. On a personal basis, I totally agree with everything that's said.
It's interesting hearing you guys, because it's, the synergies or the overlap with the concerns that we have are fairly much in line, right? The way that things are being managed.
It is.
And looking into the future and being scared, right?
I think that I just want to touch on a little bit of, you talk about you guys are not allowed to go in fishing holes, and I know that because with his brother Jackie, or Ronald, I was asked by Ronald to help him, and this goes back in history. My dad used to go help his grandfather, and they used to trade fish for beef or whatever. We always worked together between our family, Elsie and Gertie. My mom and dad's holiday at the end of haying season was to go pick huckleberries in the barrage burn with Elsie and Gertie and Lottie Moldo and all of them. So we've been involved with the First Nations and been part of being accepted by them, and actually we became part of their family and they become part of ours, and that to me was a big thing. And you know, when I was playing basketball, I never realized that I was the only white guy on the team until I looked back at it, and I was. So, but just to touch on this, so I think you guys might know about this, but the Kispioks, years and years ago, they were allowed to net on the Kispiok. And I'm not sure who it was. I think it might have been Pete Moldo and Steve Morrison, but I'm not sure. They had this idea. They said, you know what? This is such a great spawning habitat for the rest of the Skeena. At that time, I don't know what percentage Gordy would be better on that than I am of the species of salmon that spawned there, but it was long before, like years ago, in the 60s or 50s, whenever. They decided that was so important as the spawning bed or spawning tributary. They voluntarily quit sending the nets. They wouldn't net the Kispioks anymore. So they're so far ahead of our governments. You know what? And the worst thing of it is you can change the government every 4 years, but your corrupt bureaucracy is still there. The bureaucrats are still there. And like I said earlier, they are overprivileged society in the bureaucracy anymore. They don't want to make changes. The minute they make a change, they have to go to work. They have to do something. They have to write. They have to do something. He made a very good point about commercial fishing. So I've looked at logbooks from old commercial fishermen out there in the ocean. Before DFO got involved in saying you go net at the mouth of the Skeena in Region 4, Ronnie Langdale had logbooks, 62,000 pounds of salmon, one steelhead. He said the steelhead to us was a junk fish. It was 8 cents a pound. So we stayed away from it. We fished the west side of the Charlottes. But then here comes the money again. Jimmy Pallison buys a fishing lodge and opens up a fishing lodge on the Charlottes. He's got a lot of money. They closed all the commercial fishing where they could catch all the sockeye. And that's not a fish that the fishing lodge fishes for. They fish for Chinook and coho. But now they can't go and get the sockeye. So where do they move them? To the mouth of the Skeena. Now your bycatch of everything else goes through the roof. So they have mismanaged, like, I made this statement at a meeting with DFO one time. I said, they should have put you fellas in charge of the mountain pine beetle. You would have had them extinct in 2 years.
I've heard that same one from mosquitoes.
And it's just, I cannot believe the people that are running our governments and our ministers that we have can do a worse job. It is the worst job of managing anything I've ever seen. And it's like they're trying, to me it's like a conspiracy to get rid of all wild fish, all wild this, and let's fast track big industry. Maybe it is, I don't know.
Well, Gord sort of hit on it, right? Like he talked about the user groups, and my understanding, DFO invited us on a call where they were talking to all the indigenous nations in the Skeena to give an update on what they're seeing on the land. but they have 3 calls during once a week, and one's First Nations, one's the rec, one's the commercial, right? And so their decision-making process is trying to fit somewhere in the middle, so they're not stepping on one group, right? So like what you said, you know, the path forward, more all of these user groups can be in alignment, the more strength.
And as I say, if it could be done on a smaller basis in the Skeena, everybody appreciated that process when we were all involved in it. Yeah, we had a few battles here and there was contentious issues. But when you look at all the similarities first, and you recognize that everybody's after having fish first, more fish coming back. There's so many similarities in what we do. That's where we should start from, not our differences. And I think it worked very well. It went on for a number of years, and it was a facilitated process. So it wasn't led by the government agencies. And now we have a lot of philanthropist organizations in the Skeena that garner money or get money from different places. And then they have become a player now. And of course the governments go to them as well because they have money. But everyone has an agenda in that game, right? The philanthropist organizations and the people funding it, and so everyone's got a different agenda, and it's pretty hard to get it around so that everybody's sitting at the same table and working on what's first, which is fish. We can't, the changes on the land, we all know it will heal slowly. And we can't control the weather, of course, but we have to do the things that we can learn from. And one of the interesting things about fish is with their life cycle, it's one of the first things we can see results in. It's pretty hard to watch a forest grow, but if we can start to do something with fish. Brian was involved with salmon enhancement. We went from hundreds on the Kiskiak to almost 10,000 in about 15 years.
Out there.
Yeah. But then when they opened it up to the sport fishermen again, it was gone again.
Yeah. So I have words to that. Oh no. I just wanted to make a couple of comments and perhaps questions to Gordon and Wadley. So one of the things that we are an organized society and have been organized or recognized by the government since 1946, but that's their recognition. We've been organized like forever, and the government didn't feel that we were organized when they became organized in 1867. You know, we still conduct the business today as we did 200, 300,000 years ago. We do it the same way. We still do it. We still do it today. We're doing it today. We're doing it for our one of our mothers in Kiskiaks today. That's being conducted. That's how far back our history is, and how strong our jurisdiction is, and what we are tied to the land, tied to our kula, our blankets, you know, tied to our adao, our history. We've watched, I mean, even in my short lifespan, I know what you guys are talking about. I know what Salmehoch is talking about, what Gene is talking about when he talked about walking on the backs of the fish. I actually saw that. My mom and dad took me out to, I think it was McCully Creek. And I saw that. I couldn't believe it. We've seen the mismanagement. We've seen we witnessed what has gone on in just the last year. We see how the government so depends on the Thai fishery to provide escapement numbers, and then we're tasked with, oh, you can't fish at this time. or you only have to use a certain size net to that only catches spring salmon and lets the sockeye through. You know, and we're the ones that are taking the brunt of mismanagement. It riddles us to the nth degree of we're the last user group, and we're the ones that are tasked with well, you know, my grandparents, my parents, they don't get fish this year. That's what we're faced up against. We're tasking the government today. Let's get together. Let's have a discussion here. We're shutting down the wreck fishery within the Gitxsan territory because that's where our tahket, where our jurisdiction lies. No one can tell us any different because that's the law. It is our standard of life. It is not something that just came about in the last little while. That's who we are. We're even going to entertain a tribunal at the end of the day. Once we can get the government's back to the table. They've been elusive in the last few meetings. Gordon, you mentioned a couple of things earlier, and I'm wondering if and I think you clarified it already. However, you said you want to work with the crisis management team. Now, is that coming from the Upper Skeena Angling Guide Association? Now, the question is, you said you don't want to see Kispiox. Is that the message that's coming from the association?
No, when Gene gave his personal opinion, I thought I
Hold
was
on,
free to
hold
do
on,
that.
hold on.
Sorry.
Hold on. No, this was when you first started talking. I tried to record some of your comments. That's why I'm questioning right now to make sure that I know where, or we know where you're coming from. The other one was you're wanting to see how the crisis management team is getting the government to the table. Now, is that what the association is asking you to say to us today? So there's three questions in there.
So on the last one, the association in discussion realized that we have to deal with this. We have to talk to you guys and find out where you're going with this, so to see if we can help, what we can do. Recognizing that we've essentially been in trespass for years, and you know me, I was involved years ago, and it just never seemed to come to the fore. And you have to appreciate, I'm happy to see that there is effort being made on this on behalf of the chiefs, because in my opinion, if you weren't here and it was just us that landed here and found all of these riches, it would be gone. That is the nature of our society. So I'm not surprised that you're leading the way to move towards ensuring the fish stay. The Guide Association, from what I understand, I think you were at the last meeting, Gene. I'm going to go back with them and tell them what I've heard, and then they can make up their mind about where they go. My personal opinion, would I work with you guys? Yes. Any way that I could. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, guys.
Robert?
I just wanted to add what Dean said about trading berries and meat for salmon. We used to do it with our neighbors when they stopped. Because they don't get moose, that much moose further down. And berries, blueberries. And then the government stepped in and stopped that. They started charging people. And that's the whole problem. They try to control everything. And I kept reminding them of what happened at Newfoundland, the codfish. Miss Menace said, today it hasn't recovered. That's why we're said we're in dire crisis here. They don't seem to care. And, yeah, we're very happy that anybody here wants to work with us. And as far as our jurisdiction is concerned, it's not just an odd that we're closing. It's the whole Skeena under our jurisdiction, starting from Liddy. That's where our boundary is towards the coast. And it's supposed to be further down to Smithers, but they moved it in. That's the one we control, our jurisdiction as Gitxsan. So in that, sometimes there's a spacing between there, there's a gap. That includes the whole Skeena. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
We want to thank you very much for coming to the meeting. I believe we would be more than happy to have future discussions.
Thank you, Brody.
Thank
Thank you
guys.
for your outline, nice to meet you, and it's a pleasure meeting you, gentlemen. That's the other here.
Mr. Ham. Gene? Mr. Ham.
Thanks, Ron.
You could take that.
Yep, Tony.
Okay.
You can cut all my stuff out of there.
That'll be headlines.
Okay.
See how you doing?
Better than I thought.
Yeah, kind of good.